Hello, welcome to Expositions. You do not hear much about Shamgar as an example of godliness, bravery, or faith. I suppose that is because all we know about him is summed up in one verse. Judges chapter 3, verse 31, which reads, "After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 men of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also delivered Israel." This appears in the inspired record. Almost as a footnote it would appear. As a matter of fact, the next verse refers not to Shamgar as a point of reference, but to Ehud, the judge mentioned prior to Shamgar. But Shamgar's life was significant enough to deserve a place in Scripture, and that should make it meaningful to us. Shamgar delivered Israel through his faith, his courage, and that itself makes him significant. But what I want us to realize is that faith in God and spiritual courage are enough to make everyone significant, whether you think so right now or not. Many people, especially those who are younger and have not had opportunities to go out and to do things, not many experiences, may wonder whether or not there is any significance to their lives. Shamgar should give you hope. Shamgar should point you in that right direction to understand that when you are focusing your life in the right way on pleasing God and doing His will, your life will always have significance. So let's consider some lessons from this very brief text in principle that hopefully will ground you in an important truth that will help guide you in life. And we begin with this simple exhortation: be a significant individual. Now I say that to say it's a choice to make. In James chapter 1 verse 25 says that we have a choice to make about whom we serve and what we do. Because it's not a matter, as he pointed out earlier in that text, be you doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. But after making this comparison to a mirror, essentially, he says, "Whosoever looketh into the perfect law of liberty and continueth therein, he be not a forgetful hearer of the word, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed," or in his doing. That when we take a look into God's word and are willing to do what's found there we can find significance. Now think about that as we consider some passages of Scripture for our benefit. You matter to God. That itself, sometimes people question. I think they get down on themselves and then they kind of put that off onto how they think God thinks of them. But if we turn over to Mark chapter 12, we find a very different point of view. In Mark chapter 12, picking up in verse 41, here we find God definitely thinking highly of an individual. Now Jesus sat opposite the treasury and saw how the people put money into the treasury, and many who were rich put in much. Then one poor widow came and threw in 2 mites, which make a quadrans. So he called his disciple to himself and said to them, "Assuredly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury. For they all put in out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had, her whole livelihood." Now think about, from Jesus' perspective, what he saw in this woman. She did not own hardly anything at all. But the fact that she was willing to give that proved just how much she mattered. More, in this case, Jesus said, than all the other people. She put in more. Why? Because she essentially gave herself. If one widow giving 2 mites because she gives herself mattered to Jesus in that way, then you ought to understand with confidence that you matter to God. Never take what you have as a contribution to the Lord for granted. Never think that the little bit maybe you think you're doing is not that big of a deal. Sometimes people get caught up in the big things that are going on in the congregation and what the preacher is doing or what the elders are doing or some important work that a deacon is overseeing and taking care of as he's working through some matters of finance or some work for the church. You, by participating, by belonging, by doing your part, you're significant. You know, when you think about the number of times that one person was doing one small thing that made the difference in a huge project, perhaps you might think of some of the things that have happened with NASA over the years, that one person's contribution meant the difference between life or death. One person's contribution meant the difference between success and failure. To understand, my friend, that you can be significant by your participation at whatever level, to the most you have to do, you matter. You matter to all those you impact for good in life. As we turn now to John chapter 1, verses 40 through 42, we find another instance of one individual, one person just doing a small little thing and yet mattering. Notice here, one of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which is translated the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Now when Jesus looked at him, he said, "You are Simon the son of Jonah. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated a stone. You matter to all those you have an impact on for good. Think about the impact Andrew had on Peter. We usually think of Peter as being this great leader, and certainly he was. Was he a person of significance? Surely he was. But Andrew's impact was strong. Just if he had done no more than this, he was responsible for introducing Peter to Jesus. You could do that same thing. You can be the person as a Bible class teacher who is introducing a young child to Jesus, the first one to walk them through the death of Jesus on the cross and its significance, to explain with wonder the resurrection. You could be the one who provides the seed in a child's heart that they could one day be a preacher or an elder. They could do great things. They could serve the Lord in that congregation and do great, wondrous things. You have the opportunity to introduce someone to the Lord by talking to your friend. You may not feel like you're able to do the Bible study, but you can show them why you believe what you do. You can have an impact for good. And if you will only make those efforts, step out and talk to people, you can have an impact that truly matters and is truly significant. You matter as an example for all people. Your example matters as in the congregation where you attend. It matters that you are there. It matters that they see you participating. You matter as an example for your family, that they see you and faith in what you're doing, that you're always doing for God. You put Him first, and that makes a difference. When they look out and they see someone who is committed to doing right, to working in the congregation, to reading a Bible, to worshiping, and helping them do the same, you matter. You can matter for a future generation. Training up children, your own, helping others, helping young families who are having maybe a struggle with their children, sitting with them, or maybe that their parents don't have faith, you can have an impact. Be that kind of example, as Timothy was in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12. Have the character that matters, and you will have an impact. You matter, my friend, more than you think. Let's be more intentional about it and make sure that we use what we have and have significance. Second of all, then, when we think about Shamgar, we should see his faith and what he accomplished. And that means you need to have confidence and have a significant faith, a faith that matters. In Hebrews 11 and verse 6, there we find the writer says, "Without faith it is impossible to please Him, for he that comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him." Now just take those words for a moment and understand our responsibility to believe that God is, and I mean to understand that He is more real than anything else in the universe. That we need to understand and trust that He really will provide a reward for us. That is, the promises God makes are real and true, and they will be reality in the future because God has said them. Have that kind of faith, and therefore a faith that says, when God says it, I know it's true, I know it's real, and I know it matters. You need to have a significant faith by having a personal faith. Learn to have a personal faith so that in John 8, verse 24, it says then, except that ye believe that I am He, you shall die in your sins. Have a personal faith, so much so that you have this belief, this trust, apart from anyone else. You don't have to have a parent talk to you and bring you anywhere to express your faith in Christ. You will do that regardless. You'll talk about Jesus and you're comfortable doing so. Have a faith that's personal so that you can say with Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 12, I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed unto Him against that day. Do you have a faith that is so strong that you know, you have confidence who Jesus is, and you have just as much confidence in what He's promised to offer you? That He says that He has this mansion that He is waiting to give you, this home with Him in heaven, in the presence of God, and that you can look now, reading the Scriptures, and see it afar off. You can, like Abraham, moving toward always where God wanted him, but looking for that better country, that you see something in the distance that is always greater because of God's promises. Make it personal to you. Make everything that God says and requires in Scripture personal to you. You may not be able to do absolutely everything, but your faith and what He says ought to matter that much to you. Take on and have then what we'll call a militant faith. He went on the offensive. That's what we saw with Shamgar. He reached up and he took something whole and said, I can do this. When we say militant faith, we're not saying be offensive, but we're saying we need to be on offense. Take it going forward to do the right thing. In Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 17, we find that the only weapon that we're given as an offensive weapon is God's Word. In Ephesians chapter 6 then, in what is or should be a recognizable passage, there Paul says, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you were able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Having this kind of faith, a faith that says, I'm going to arm myself, I'm going to prepare myself, I'm going to guard myself, and then I'm going to take God's Word up, and I'm going to have such confidence in it that I'm going to move forward with God's Word. So a militant faith is not being rude to people. It is not being the most obnoxious person in the room. Militant faith means I am holding on to my faith with such confidence that I am going to move forward and not always be where I have to defend myself, but rather I'm going to take God's Word, talk about God's Word, and have other people have to try to defend the wrong things they believe so that they can understand the truth. Where we will not sit back and just watch things going on around us and bemoan the fact that we're having problems in the country or we're having problems in the congregation, but rather we move forward and say, here's what God says to do. Why aren't we doing it? That we become a people who are committed to saying, if God says we need to go out and talk to people, why aren't we doing it more? Where's our evangelism program? Why aren't we talking about the truth to people? If we have need, we say, we're not really teaching a lot in our Bible class program. Let's stand up and say so and talk about how can we improve things here? How can we be more active in the community? Does the local community even know we exist? Have a strength of faith to say, let's move forward. Let's take on the world instead of just taking on the opportunity to see if we can't keep this building up. We need to have a militant faith to say, I'm totally in and I'm ready to be busy about the work. When you look over and see what Shamgar did, he was ready to go against 600 men of the Philistines. He had a faith that says, I'm moving forward when no one else is. and that's what we need others to do. We also need, if you will, an unconventional faith, because Shamgar took up an ox goad. Now, that's important when you think about it, because that's not a typical weapon. You wouldn't normally think, I'm going to go to war and I'm going to go find an ox goad to take care of it. It was what was available. It was certainly a tool that was used there, but he put it to a different purpose than they were expecting. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7, there we find that Paul says, we walk by faith and not by sight. Most people are expecting some kind of argumentative person who's very opinionated and just throws out whatever they believe without any kind of idea of needing to back it up. That's today's world a lot of times. We need to have an unconventional faith. A faith that says, I am totally convinced, and it's the nature of my conviction that is what I use in pointing people to God's Word so that they see in me a different kind of person. Have an unconventional faith that is so convicted of God's Word that I'm not afraid to speak up about it. Have an unconventional faith that says, I'm going to do the hard things, and when people ask, I said, well, because God says so. This is what God says. And that is always so much of what we are, that it becomes ingrained in our persona. That we become people that they wonder, why are you like this? So that then we can take this faith that's different than just the casual kind of faith that we see so often of I believe generically in things, to believe and understand God's Word in a very specific way so that He is always on our lips, always in our hearts, and that we are reaching out to people with love in showing them our faith and expressing the faith that they also should have. That's the kind of faith that you should want. And you need to reach out and make this a significant faith in your own life. Thirdly, then, live with significant purpose. When you look and consider Shamgar, as it closes, we find that he mattered greatly. He took that ox goad, but the last line it says about him, and he also delivered Israel. Do you see that his life really mattered for this reason? It wasn't the ox goad, it wasn't his willingness to always step forward, but it was that purpose that led him, that made all these other things line up to be so important and significant. In Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, there we find the Apostle Paul give us a challenge to significance, where he says, "Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended. But this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth into those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." The Apostle Paul was expressing their confidence. He knew exactly what he was supposed to be doing as he lived upon the earth. He was not supposed to be worried about any of the typical things that fill our lives. He says, I'm worried about one thing, going to heaven. I'm worried about pleasing God enough to where He will raise me up that day to then let me be with Him. And if that is accomplished, friends, if that is something that you are working toward in the way Paul was, you are giving your life significant purpose, and you should live that way. What you do as an individual can have a tremendous impact on others. You need to have confidence in that simple fact. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1, it says, "Be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ." Now think about intentionally living in such a way, as Paul did then, to be able to tell people, if you don't know what to do next, if you don't understand how we ought to act in this situation, if you don't recognize the kind of words you should use, if you don't understand why we should not be going over here to watch that, or if you don't appreciate why you should be changing up some things in your life, follow me. Watch me. You see, a lot of times we lose an opportunity for significance because we're afraid that people are watching us. And we just want to melt into the background and hope no one notices these few little oddities that we choose to do when we are making good decisions. Really, instead, to be significant, we should be willing to talk about the decisions that we make, the choices that we make, and why we're making them, to show people we're doing this for God. It makes a difference in our lives, and that if they will make the same choices, it can make a difference in their lives too. Let's then take another example, again from the Apostle Paul, and consider his words in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 5. In 2 Corinthians, Paul has been writing to correct a problem with Judaizing teachers and defending himself from attacks that those teachers had made against him to try to shake the faith of the Corinthians. But in the process, he's dealing with some specific issues. And one of the issues that he addressed was the collection that he brought up in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. He had told them when he had talked to them originally that they needed prepared to give this money to be able to send for the relief of the brethren in Judea. And so now, having told them that, and then told them how to accomplish it by taking a collection every first day of the week, we find that in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9, he's now addressing this more specifically because he's concerned that they are not really taking this exhortation seriously. So when you turn over to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, we find a verse that really puts on display as he brings out some other brethren for an example. Now he did this in a sense to shame them, but it's important for our benefit to understand how we can have significance. In chapter 8 and verse 5, it says, "And not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord, and then to us by the will of God." What a marvelous statement about a group of people. We find that he was talking about the brethren of the churches in Macedonia from verse 1. That would have been the Thessalonians, the Philippians, that these brethren, he says, they were giving as a people, but they were a giving people because they first gave themselves. They had their heart in their Christianity, and therefore their money followed. He is then going to essentially get on to the Corinthians and say, you promised that you wanted to give. You said you were willing to give. You need to follow through on it. He didn't have to say that to the Macedonians, because they were such an example. He had such confidence in them, and we learned from Philippians that the Philippians were not a wealthy people. It didn't matter. They were a giving people. Now think about the fact that he was able to point to these people. All they were doing was doing something from the heart. All they were doing was living their lives as God expected them to. All they were doing was saying, some brethren need help, let me help. And then Paul was able to say, see, they did something that mattered. They recognized the significance of this action, and they took action. You need to see why it's significant, why it matters for others, but he's also saying, and why it should matter to you. In Proverbs 22 and verse 6, we find another example that I hope will matter much to you. There, the writer says, "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." You can be significant in the example you set for your children, in the training you give, in what you show and raise their expectations up to be of here's what Christianity ought to be in your life. To show them first that Christ matters. To show them that it is not a bunch of words said on Sunday, but it's a life lived all week. To show them that the Bible is important and matters to you, not just on Sundays, but on Monday through Saturday. To show them that these principles are things that when you receive correction, you change. When the preacher maybe points out something and your child knows, well, wait a minute, we don't do that, and then you change and you do it and you're more involved, that this is an example to your children that can affect how they see you and how they see God, how they see the work of the church. And that could have an effect on their souls for the rest of eternity. You yourself can become living proof of God's power to save a soul and transform a life. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, we find what happened in the Corinthians' life. And if you've never obeyed the gospel, I want you to listen carefully to these words as we consider them. In the first epistle to the Corinthians, to give us context on these people and where they were coming from in their past, Paul makes reference to their obedience. For here he finds in chapter 6, beginning in verse 9, "Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners will inherit the kingdom of God. Now listen carefully to the next verse. And such were some of you, but you were washed, but you were sanctified, but you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus and by the Spirit of our God. God can transform a life. And if you've never become a Christian, you may think that you have participated in things that He cannot forgive. Here He's showing that your life can still be significant. It can still matter. You can still change. There is still time. You can still be delivered just as Shamgar was ready to work in delivering Israel. You can do this if you're willing to turn to God's Word, if you're willing to trust God. Not men, but God. If you're willing to change. You see, they were these things, but they were no longer these things. They made a significant change in their lives that meant they were now living for God. But then they were willing to also stand up and be counted as Christians in confession, Romans 10, 9 and 10. And they are all baptized for the remission of their sins. Acts 2 verse 38, everyone must be. And that's what meant they were washed. It's why they were sanctified. It's why they were justified. They did what God said to do so that they could be forgiven. And you can do that too. Your participation in reaching the lost matters. Strengthening the saved matters. Doing good matters. It makes you part of the greatest purpose you can have on this earth as God's people. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 58. John Maxwell said, to be significant, all you have to do is make a difference with others wherever you are with what you have. Shamgar exemplifies that statement. And so can you. You do not have to have your name in the history books to be significant. You just need to commit yourself to living according to God's book. You do not have to fight a single earthly battle to be significant. You just need to have a faith that will not quit until God's will is done. You do not have to deliver a nation from oppression to be significant, but you do need to commit yourself to helping deliver others from their sin. You can make a difference for God wherever you are now, with whatever talent you currently possess, with the people you already know. You need to have the faith, the courage, and an appreciation for your own significance. Friends, you can be a Shamgar. So why not start today? I'm Kevin Rhodes. I thank you so much for watching Expositions.